Peace and welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Faraji Muhammad. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation. Folks, we got a lot to talk about today. First and foremost, we check in with Dr. Gerald Horne for today's Horne Report as he talks to us about those classified documents that were found in President Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence's home. And what does that mean for the American people? We'll have that conversation. Also, we're going to be checking in with Senator Paul Strauss, who has been fighting for the statehood for the District of Columbia. We're going to get the latest about that situation. Later on, Meta has officially announced that it will reinstate Donald Trump's account on both Instagram and on Facebook. What does that mean? And then later we'll check in with my brother Sinead Okorafor to talk about when you're not engaged at work, how do you stay productive? Stay with us. That conversation and a whole lot more in today's edition of The Culture here on the Black Star Network. Let's go. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Faraji Muhammad. Let's jump right in, as today we're going to get another installment of the great report talking about both local, both domestic and foreign affairs. Now let's check in with Dr. Gerald Horne for the Horne Report. Dr. Horne, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. How you feeling, sir?
It's all good.
Good. Dr. Horne, let's just jump right into it. First and foremost, sir, this situation around these classified documents. First, when President Trump, when we saw this whole dilemma with the former president having his classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago residence, I mean, there was a big brouhaha, of course. National Archives, the FBI, so many different agencies wanted to know what was going on. It took him a year and a half to maybe 2 years after he left office to finally have his people to give up the documents. And they're still making sure that they got all the necessary documents. So there was a lot of talk, oh, he is incompetent and all of those things. But then, boom, we see that we hear that President Biden got classified documents from his time as a former vice president when he served under President Obama. So we found that out. And of course, his team giving up those documents very, very quickly, did not sit on them like President Trump did. And then a couple of days later, boom, former Vice President Mike Pence they found some documents from his time in the White House and in office. So what do we make of this, sir? Is this classified document thing, is this a regular thing? Is this a common thing? Not regular, but is it common that these high-profile political officials would walk away from their administrations, walk away from the White House with classified documents?
It is common, but what is also common, I'm afraid to say, is that there's a double standard in terms of the scrutiny and prosecution. That is to say, below the level of the chief executive, the president, you are routinely prosecuted for being sloppy with documents. We do not expect Mr. Biden to be prosecuted, not least because there is an informal rule in the Justice Department that you can indict a sitting president. But we don't expect Mr. Pence to be prosecuted either. Mr. Trump, of course, is another question. And this leads to the other point, which is that the problem with these documents is that the United States overclassifies documents. Recall that just a few days ago, Mr. Biden's team ruled that documents from the assassination of President Kennedy in November 1963, that thousands of documents from that period, decades ago, would remain classified. I'm not sure what the purpose is. I'm not sure what the reason is. Many of the alleged perpetrators and wrongdoers in 1963 have now passed on to the great beyond, but it's a reflection of the fact that you have many bureaucrats who put a stamp of top secret or the like on documents when it does not need to be there.
So this puts us in a different space then. If they're overclassifying the documents, what does that say about the actual content of those documents? What does that say about the information? And I'm wondering, Dr. Horn, does if President Biden is holding some documents from 8, 10, 12 years ago, is that information still relevant at this point? Because I know that geopolitics changes every day. Things change, relationships change. The conversation that the United States may have with China 10 years ago is a different conversation today. So does that weigh into this conversation, like the actual content?
It certainly does, but unfortunately, it's hard to say, hard to make an opinion about these documents unless we know what's in the documents, and of course that's secret. That's secret.
Right.
So it's sort of a catch-22. But this brings me to another point, which is that Mr. Biden is being criticized sharply by fellow Democrats, including Dick Durbin, who's the number 2 Democrat in the U.S. Senate, hailing from the state of Illinois. He's also been criticized by Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who obviously has been on the wrong side of many debates with Mr. Biden. And this raises another point that has occurred to many, which is that, is this document scandal, so-called, is this a way to try to ease Mr. Biden out of the White House? What I mean is that there's a lot of discontent with Mr. Biden, not least because of this Ukraine escalation, which some suggest is bringing the country and the world to the brink of World War III. The second point is that if he's elected in November 2024, he will be 86 years old. And we already see that Mr. Biden is losing a step or two and losing the velocity on his fastball. And so this document, so-called scandal, might be a way to chip away at his already eroding credibility and to prepare the path for another Democratic nominee. You may have heard that the Democratic governor of Illinois, the multimillionaire J.B. Pritzker, one of the richest men in the United States, has been overheard speaking about his presidential ambitions. It's been suspected that Governor Newsom of California harbors similar ambitions, not to mention Governor Whitmer of Michigan. So once again, it's hard to figure out what's going on because so much is classified and so much is secret.
Right. And I want to throw in there also too, Dr. Horn, and Amanda hasn't even served a full 30 days in office yet, but there's already talk that Governor Wes Moore of Maryland could be a potential contender for 2024. And I'm like, what? Are you serious already? He hasn't even got started. But they's like, oh, he's the future of the Democratic Party. And I think another gentleman, I was reading another political article they were talking about. I think his name is Mr. Frank Shapiro, who is another possible contender. And so they were making the point that the Democratic side, their bench is getting a little bit deeper as we're talking about 2024. So I found that to be very, very interesting. But back to the point that you're making, that this may be a way to ease out the president. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, just like I'm sure you thought to yourself, what is there to gain for Democrats to crap on their president right now, considering there has been some big wins that the Biden and Harris administration have been able to get in terms of, moving the needle on certain issues. But why stop the momentum? Why be, for Senator Dick Durbin? And I saw his quote. Like, what are you trying to do? Because there's so much partisan bickering that's happening right now that it opens the door for more stuff to be said about the president. Are we all happy about President Biden's performance at this point? No, we're not all happy. But at the same time, if we look across the aisle and see the alternative, we're saying, so I'm not understanding the strategy here for Durbin, from Manchin, and some other Democrats who are looking to try to discredit this president. What would you say is the strategy from that?
Well, I think with regard to Manchin, it's clear. Mr. Trump won his state by double digits in both 2020 and 2024. he is up for re-election in 2024. As a matter of fact, he might not even run for re-election in 2024 because it's unclear if he could prevail as U.S. Senator. With regard to Mr. Durbin, he hails from the state of Illinois. And let me remind you what I said a moment or two ago about his governor, Governor Pritzker, having presidential ambitions all of its own. And once again, I need to reiterate and underscore this foreign policy crisis in Ukraine, which is not going away anytime soon. And the only way for the United States to extricate itself possibly from this quagmire is to change the man at the top. And that provides a very useful way to get him out of the Oval Office.
Wow, that is very, very interesting. Let me go to my culture crew. Folks are checking in as we're having this conversation with you, Dr. Horn, talking about this classified document scandal. Conscious Thought, my guy, you kicking us off today, bro. You said relative to the continuing revelation of classified documents being found all around, we may want to consider that this is not coincidental. I'm interested in going down that road just a little bit, Dr. Horn. We see it on both sides now, both Democrats and Republicans. Do you feel like this is coincidental? Do you feel like that there could have been some intention to kind of put these candidates, and we know that Mike Pence might be thinking about running for president as well for the GOP. But do you think like any of this is coincidental?
Well, I think one would have to be a coincidence theorist in order to feel that this is coincidental. The stakes are so high in Washington, D.C., involving not only power, but also funds, also money. And so when you see documents uncovered in the Biden garage in Delaware, at his office in Philadelphia, at the Penn Biden Center, and by the way, speaking of something that may not be coincidental, it's quite striking that Mr. Biden was being paid a handsome sum from the University of Pennsylvania, a leading Ivy League university. And guess what happens? The president of the University of Pennsylvania, who lures him to Philadelphia, is now U.S. ambassador to Germany, one of the most powerful and prestigious ambassadorial posts that the United States can hand out. But once again, it's hard to say until we get an idea of what's in the documents. For example, we know, or we suspect that we know, that Mr. Trump was holding back documents concerning North Korea, that he was holding back documents concerning French President Macron. It's unclear what Mr. Pence had in his home in Indiana, and it's also unclear what Mr. Biden had.
It is very unclear, very, very unclear. Look, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Horn. I also want to pick Dr. Horn's brain about social media companies, as now social media companies are under scrutiny, especially with a new lawsuit that is calling for social media companies to be held accountable for their roles in politics and in other areas of our lives. So we're going to have that conversation with Dr. Horn and, of course, with you. So stay tuned. A lot more to come at you here on The Culture, here on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Your money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is roland@rolandsmartin.com.
Folks, welcome back to the culture here on the Black Star Network. We've been checking in with our very own Dr. Gerald Horne from the University of Houston to talk to us about the latest issue around the classified documents that we're seeing, this document gate, some have called it, with President Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence, and it seems like former President Donald Trump. We're going to certainly keep our eyes on this story as we have this conversation. But we wanted to shift gears, and I wanted to pick Dr. Horne's brain around the issue of social media companies as they are once again back in the spotlight as a result of not just the January 6th situation, but I did want to pick his brain, and we're going to go into a bigger conversation later on about this, folks. But I just want to throw this out there to get Dr. Horne's take on it, because social media, Meta in particular, the formerly known as Facebook, has announced that they will reinstate former President Donald Trump's accounts on both their Facebook platform and on their Instagram platform. And we'll certainly talk more about it. But this is just another example of what we're seeing with social media. And there is a new lawsuit that has been filed against social media companies in regards to their role in this whole situation. I want to bring Dr. Horne back into the frame here. Dr. Horne, first and foremost, before we get into this lawsuit piece, what's your take on Meta's announcement that they are going to reinstate President Trump's accounts?
I don't find it surprising at all. Keep in mind that part of the Republican Party agenda going into 2024 is to attack what they consider to be woke corporations. Recall that Governor DeSantis of Florida, who is number 2 right now behind Mr. Trump, scored a lot of points with the Trump base when he began to attack the Disney Corporation, which is a major factor in the economy of Florida. Here in Texas, where I'm speaking to you now, the state attorney general has been attacking Wall Street firms because supposedly they're reluctant to finance corporations that manufacture weapons. And so when Meta, that is to say Facebook and Instagram, yield to Mr. Trump, I think that what they're trying to do is forestall one of these kinds of attacks on them, particularly since Meta has been losing buckets of money in recent years as it tries to move into the virtual space. And so it does not have much room for error at that particular level. And so it decides that the better part of wisdom is to let Mr. Trump back into their good graces, despite the fact that undoubtedly he may use their platform to create mischief.
That's a big risk. That's a big chance to take, Dr. Horne. That's a very, very big chance to take on that. And that's so interesting that that's the case. Now, I want to also talk about the fact that, folks, there's a class action lawsuit that was just recently filed, which could hold, as Politico said, could blaze the trail to hold social media companies accountable for an increase in eating disorders, anxiety, and depression. The suit is expected to be filed in California's Northern District Court next month, and could decide whether the companies need to pay up and change their ways if it's allowed to proceed. This is as a result of what we have been talking about in terms of social media's influence on young people, particularly young boys and younger girls, teenage boys and teenage girls, around the issue of body image, body positivity, putting out certain messages, And even in certain spaces on social media social media platforms, there is a lot of cyberbullying as it relates to eating disorders, body issues. And so, do you think that this might be? I mean, social media has been in the news for a lot of things. We, of course, with the January 6th situation. But do you think that this actually might stick, where social media will be forced to look at their algorithms, look at their the chatter that happens on there each and every day, look at which members are being troublesome and which members are being victimized? Do you think that's going to be that level of accountability with this lawsuit?
Well, you're bringing up the complaint from the other side of the aisle. That is to say that the Democrats in particular have been hammering Facebook and social media in particular for that very reason that undergirds that lawsuit. That is to say that it contributes to negative social phenomena, not only in terms of the body shaming and body images that you just made reference to, but also, according to some critics, in terms of whipping up a violent white nationalism through their algorithms. What I mean by that is you watch one video and it recommends another video and another video and another video. Mm-hmm. The problem is, with regard to this lawsuit, is the U.S. Supreme Court. And one has to wonder, either the U.S. Supreme Court, if it goes that far, that this litigation goes that far, either they will stick to their usual premise, which is to favor the wealthy and the 1%, and therefore toss this lawsuit, or they will revert to their other premise, which is supporting whatever the GOP comes forward with. And as noted in my previous comment, the GOP also has a beef with social media. So it's difficult to say which way the Supreme Court will yield given those two imperatives.
Now, this conversation came out, Dr. Horn, for those who don't know, as a result of the testimony that former Facebook product manager Frances Hogue made, where there were some documents released revealing that Meta new users of Facebook, of Instagram, were suffering from ill health effects, but they did not respond. They know that these things are happening, body shaming, cyberbullying, these things are happening, but they have not responded, and in some ways continue to put out these messages. And so now, and according to the report, Meta hasn't responded to the lawsuit's claims, but the company has added new tools to its social media space to help users curate their feeds. But is that enough? Are we, it's interesting that when we have these conversations about agencies and institutions, and I'm talking about those real life agencies, not tech companies, they put certain measures in place. And it's like, oh, now you're going to, first you did the deed of violating, but now you think you can also correct yourself so many months later or a couple of years later. And it doesn't make sense that the same company that caused the problem now could say, hey, there's no problem here. There's no problem here. Matter of fact, we'll correct ourselves without an independent intervention, without some sort of other group to oversee, to ensure that accountability is there. So I'm a little bit confused as how Meta is able to say, well, we're going to correct our own problem. When if you could have corrected the problem before, why did you wait till now to do it?
Well, you're pointing to the traditional problem in dealing with these corporations. They serve as both the arsonist and the firefighter. Right. That is to say, they set the fire, and then they say, well, we're the only people who know how to put the fire out. And obviously, that's not sustainable. But once again, as long as the courts are leaning to that aforementioned imperative where they yield to the interests of the Fortune 500 and the 1%, well, Meta, Facebook, will probably be home safe. I should also mention that the Facebook executive, the Meta executive, who's dealing with this crisis happens to be Nick Clegg, who you may recall is a former leading politician in Great Britain. I find it quite striking that Meta was able to lure him away from the House of Parliament. And now he's in the middle of this controversy, but I guess they feel that his political chops are what they need right now to deal with putting out these fires.
Absolutely, absolutely. We got a couple of moments left, Doc. And I'm wondering from your vantage point, what do you do about social media? I mean, you work in the space of history. You're also an attorney. You've been trained in law. So what do you do? Do we start to really come up with policy? Do we, what can be done? Because we do know that these platforms have power and influence, and they do shape the conversation. I mean, we have digital space. We have a digital network on these spaces. So what do we do?
Well, I think we do what we've been doing. I encourage and salute the lawsuit that you just made reference to, even though, as suggested, it may not be successful. But then again, it may be successful, and it may create a kind of pressure that we need with regard to social media. Certainly, we need legislation. If you look at the present legislation that governs how social media operates, it's really slanted towards Silicon Valley. Given the fact that you have a Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate and the Republicans only have a 4-person majority in the House, it seems to me that legislation coming out of Washington is also something that needs to be pressed. But if it's going to be pressed, it needs a grassroots upsurge behind it. And I think that's what's missing right now.
Right. Absolutely. I would wholeheartedly agree that that's definitely what's missing. Dr. Horn, it's always a pleasure and a privilege to chat with you, sir, each week. So God willing, we'll be able to reconnect with you next week. But thank you again for another installment of today's Horn Report.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, we're going to check in with Senator Paul Strauss, who is fighting for the statehood of D.C. That conversation is up next here on The Culture, right here on the Black Star Network.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol,
we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Folks, thank you so much for tuning into The Culture here on the Black Star Network. We are going to shift gears now. We're going to talk to one man who is continuing the great fight of finding some level of independence for the District of Columbia. This is the fight for D.C. statehood, and this has been an ongoing battle to take D.C. out of the designation of being just a district and really making it a place where people can say, you know what? This is a legitimate state. Here, we're going to be joined now by Senator Paul Strauss here, and we're very, very happy to have him on. Good afternoon, Senator. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Senator, first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing around this issue because, this is, I'm from Baltimore, and there have been talks about DC as far as being in its own state for as long as I can remember, Senator. And
well, it's a fight that's been going on over 200 years. So
I'm not quite that old, sir.
No, me neither. But it seems like it. Ever since the nation was founded, there's been this hypocrisy of how the district is treated. We fought a revolution for taxation without representation, recognizing that it was tyranny, and yet it's the state of affairs that we have here in the nation's capital. That's wrong. DC residents serve this country in uniform and civilian service, and we want the rights that other Americans have. And frankly, it wouldn't just be good for the people of the District of Columbia. If you look at the kind of knuckleheads that are serving in Congress right now, the idea of having voting representatives from folks who live here in Washington, D.C., joining the national conversation, let's just say at a minimum, I think we'd have a lot to add that would be of value to the American people, particularly those that live in cities around the country.
Absolutely. Now, this came up as a result of a new bill. We're going to say a new bill about an ongoing issue, right? A new bill that came up in the Senate on Tuesday. So what's different about this bill that we haven't seen in previous legislation, Senator?
Well, to be honest, this bill is a copy of the bill that was basically passed by the House of Representatives twice already. But what's different is not the bill, but the Senate is different. We finally have a bona fide Democratic majority, which means that we have a chance to at least get this bill out of committee. Under the old system where you had 50 senators, you needed to get all of the Democrats to support a bill. And we had Kristen Sinema from Arizona, who was on the committee, that wasn't able to support the bill. It didn't get out of committee.
No surprise.
So we think we'll do better in the Senate this time. Sadly, we don't have the House. And so we really need to get to that point where we have enough votes in the Senate, enough votes in the House in the same session of Congress to actually get this thing to the president's desk. But we're not giving up because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for Washington, D.C. It's the right thing to do for America. And we hope that each time we engage in this fight, we get a little bit farther along. So
yes, sir. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because there are a couple of things that folks may not know. One is that the population of DC is quite high. And one of the, I guess, the cons of this whole discussion is the fact that there is no congressional representation for the high population. So you have all of these people in a very small area, and essentially they're not being represented in our federal government. So since America's founding, you brought this up, since America's founding 200 plus years ago, if DC becomes a state, what does that do for the residents outside of the congressional representation? But does that put even our understanding of how our government work in a tailspin? Because I'm assuming that if this is the nation's capital, that it should be protected. It should have certain privileges, whether if it's not on a statehood privileges, but there should be certain endowed privileges because it represents the country. Am I thinking of this the wrong way?
Well, it has a few privileges, but what we lack are rights. What we lack are the guarantees that the Constitution gives to the residents of the 50 other states, but doesn't give to us. What we lack, in addition to congressional representation, and believe me, that's important. You know, we just saw 15 votes in the House of Representatives where nobody from DC could choose the Speaker of the House. But the biggest problem for DC residents is that we don't have self-determination. And so when it comes to making laws for our local community, it is this very same Congress that doesn't allow us to be represented that has oversight over the situations that we're going to have in Washington, D.C. And so self-determination is one of the most important things that we are going to need from the people, for the people in DC. And statehood would solve both. It would solve federal representation and self-determination. And then you would have members of Congress who live in a city. And I think you would add an urban perspective to the national debate. Right now, the United States Senate in particular is a particularly anti-urban jurisdiction. It very much doesn't reflect the demographics of the nation as a whole. It passes laws that have often been very hostile to cities. And so I think that DC statehood would do a lot, not just for the people of Washington, but for the American people as a whole, particularly those that live in large cities, which is where most Americans live. In statistical metropolitan areas. So you have a place like Vermont, we have more people than live in the whole state of Vermont. We have more people than live in the whole state of Wyoming. And yet a population as significant as ours is denied voting representation in Congress.
And these are people that live in DC, not just travel in and out. These are actual residents of the District of Columbia.
Yes, generations of Washington residents, people whose parents, grandparents, great-grandparents were born and have lived in the District of Columbia. There's some kind of bizarre idea that we're not a real place, that we're not a real people, that it's a couple of monuments or a theme park, kind of like some federal Disneyland that people come to and then leave. No, we are home to lots of people. And there is a distinct capital area where people don't live. And so I want to talk, if I could, for a second about how the statehood mechanics actually work, which is that we have basically a federal district right now. It's got the Congress in it. It's got the White House. It's got the National Mall. Everybody knows where it is. And it runs like a federal part of area. Federal employees pick up the trash. It's different police. It has different rules. And then there's a whole rest of the District of Columbia where over 700,000 people live. It's got schools, it's got university, it's got hospitals, it's got all of our houses, it's got businesses of every stripe, restaurants where you could eat food from around the world. It has nothing to do with the federal government except its proximity. And that's the part that we want to admit as the 51st state. That's the part where hundreds of thousands of Americans are denied equality. And so statehood actually would be consistent with a separate federal district, but we're going to shrink it. And so you would think all these Republicans that want to shrink the federal government and talk about the rights of local communities versus federal overreach, you would think they'd be all for it. But yet it's generally the members of the Democratic Party that are advancing this bill on freedom and equality.
Absolutely. Folks, this has been an interesting piece as we talk to Senator Paul Strauss about DC statehood. Join us in a conversation. You can post your comments in our chat as we're streaming live on YouTube and Facebook and on Black Star Network. Senator, I remember reading Marion Barry's book, Mayor for Life, where he talked about when he got into politics in DC, he realized that he had to not only advocate for being the first Black mayor of the state, of the district, but then more importantly, he had to go up against the political system at that time. He had to put policy in place where DC lost control of having, it was, I guess, for lack of a better word, like a commissioner-based, board-based system of governance, where he said, no, we need to have one mayor, just like any other independent space in the United States. And so this conversation always brings me back to that part of his story where he advocated for some level of statehood. Talk to us about, just the importance of the work that he did in terms of kind of pushing for that level of independence, and how does that affect the work that you're doing and others are doing now?
Well, Marion Barry was first elected to the school board in 1968 at a time when we couldn't even vote for the mayor. The only elected office they had was school board. And I think what you're talking about is the history of President Johnson. The government was 3 presidentially appointed commissioners, and Lyndon Johnson, who was a home rule advocate, as a get around from Congress having to pass the bill, decided to appoint only 1 commissioner, leave the other 2 seats vacant. And he began to call that commissioner, who at the time was, his name was Walter Washington, he began to call him Mr. Mayor, and the nickname stuck. And officially his title was commissioner, but President Johnson called him mayor. And it's for that reason that our chief executive is called a mayor. And so at the time, that was a big step forward in terms of what we call home rule, which was enhanced, sort of a hybrid self-determination for the district, where the district can pass laws, but then they have to be improved by Congress. It's literally still the system we have today.
Wow.
And as helpful as that was at the time, what we really need is a governor. And so the Virgin Islands, for example, is a territory that is similar in the district. It has a governor, but it doesn't have voting federal representation. It doesn't have the autonomy and rights of a state. And so we really need a chief executive like a governor who could do things like call out the National Guard. And so when we got that limited home rule, we didn't get the power to call out the National Guard. In fact, the president, if they wanted to, could declare an emergency and take over even the local police force. Now, we saw on January 6th that it was the DC police that had to come to the aid of the Capitol Police and help liberate the Capitol. And so, nobody ever thought, for example, that we would have a president that was literally as outrageous and criminally involved in staging an insurrection. I mean, I don't even think the framers could have imagined that in their wildest ideas, but certainly it wasn't in the mind of the people who crafted the limited home rule statute. But it took the DC residents, our police, our fire, our EMS, to come in and actually save democracy for the people of the United States. And so DC statehood, it's not just a political issue. It has an important role to play in enhancing our national security and keeping our institutions safe.
That's a great point.
Because we want equality, not just for ourselves, but that so we could become full citizens and take our place in protecting this country. Just like we do now. You go to any military cemetery, be it Arlington, be it the fields of Normandy, France, you're going to see gravestones with people from the District of Columbia who have died in the service of their country, but who have not had the rights, including a member of Congress who could vote to declare war. And yet we have continued to serve in every war this country's fought, often in greater numbers than our counterparts from some of the other states.
Absolutely. Senator, I got a couple of questions from our online watchers, our culture crew. Suzette Speaks, my sister, she checked in and she said, do you think Puerto Rico will likely become a state before DC? You talked about the Virgin Islands. Do you think Puerto Rico will become a state before DC?
Well, I think the people of Puerto Rico have some decisions to make amongst themselves. They have different options. Independence, as tempting as it might have been, particularly during the Trump era, was never really an option for the people of DC. So Puerto Rico has to decide what it wants to do. If they want to be a state, they should be a state. They have over 5 million Americans. They can't even vote in the presidential elections. And a lot of the arguments apply. They serve this country in uniform. They deserve to have political equality. I would like to be the 51st state. I think Puerto Rico, if they come in, should be the 52nd state. We have.
I can understand that, Senator. You got to explain that part. I can understand that.
Well, we have. First of all, we voted for statehood several times already.
Right, right.
And Puerto Rico has recently. Puerto Rico has 2 shadow senators. They have shadow members of Congress as well. I work closely with them. We respect them. I think that there are others on the island that advocate perhaps for independence or for different statuses. And so they need to unify around a solution that they want. But absolutely, look, let's face it, it is not a coincidence that every part of the United States where the population happens to be majority non-white doesn't have voting representation in Congress. So if you look at the District of Columbia, you look at Puerto Rico, you look at the Virgin Islands, you look at Guam, you look at American Samoa, all of these places have a population where the majority of that population tends to be ethnic minorities in a demographic standard, and that's not a coincidence.
We're going to leave it right
it's
there.
About time. So frankly, I think every American citizen, whether you live in a state or a territory, deserves political equality, and I am all for that. And so let's put another star on the flag. Let's put 4 or 5 more stars on the flag. You know, right now this is the only century where America is a republic, hasn't grown as a nation. Throughout our history, we've been adding stars to that flag, and every American should have a star on that flag, regardless of where you live. It's a symbol of national unity, and it shouldn't serve to divide us.
Absolutely. Senator, I want to take a quick pause when we come forward. I want to get some more remarks from you around that, but I'm so happy that you put that thought out there for us as well, that you're right. Those populations that are non-white, they do not have correct political representation, and that is a huge part of this conversation. Folks, stay with us. More conversation about DC statehood with Senator Paul Strauss here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Folks, welcome back. We have been talking to Democratic Senator Paul Strauss as we're talking about the larger issue of granting statehood to the District of Columbia, to D.C. There's a bill that is being discussed in the Senate right now around this issue, a bill that is nothing new to Congress. However, given the fact that there is more Democratic senators in the Senate right now, the possibility of this idea of making DC a state is a little better. There's a greater possibility there. So we've been talking about this. Let me go back to my online culture crew, Senator, very quickly. We got a couple of more questions. Real Brooklyn checked in and said, look, what makes DC more important, say like Brooklyn, New York, to be its own state? Founding fathers set aside a federal district to serve on the seat as government. It wasn't intended to be a state. Senator, what's your response to that, sir?
Look, I was born in Brooklyn. I love Brooklyn. It's a great place. And right now, Brooklyn has 2 United States senators, voting members of the House of Representatives, and DC doesn't. And that means that when I left Brooklyn and came to Washington, D.C., I lost the rights that I had as a resident of Brooklyn and became a second-class citizen. The truth is there should be a separate federal district, and that's what DC statehood provides for in this bill. But there should not be a population greater than states like Wyoming, Vermont, comparable to the state of Delaware, Alaska, et cetera, that don't have representation in Congress. And I will tell you that although Brooklyn is equally represented as a state with 2 senators, there are a lot of times in the Senate where issues that are important to communities like Brooklyn don't get the support it deserves in the U.S. Senate, because right now the Senate is overwhelmingly favoring rural interests, smaller states, and so two DC senators would be a powerful advocate for the people that live in Brooklyn, for the issues that are important in Brooklyn, that are important in cities around the country. Right now, 52% of U.S. senators represent about 20% of the population, because the Senate isn't based on one person, one vote. It's based on each state getting 2 senators, regardless of how many people that live there. And so nothing against Brooklyn. It's the place of my birth. It's where my family's from. My family still lives in New York, and but New York is shortchanged in the Senate, because 2 senators for a state like New York, with 16 million people, and 2 senators for a place like Wyoming, 400,000 people. You're giving Wyoming an outsized influence, and you're giving Brooklyn a diminished influence. Although with strong leadership from our new Democratic leader, Mr. Jeffries, from Senator Schumer, the majority leader in the Senate, Brooklyn certainly it can be pretty proud of the folks that it sends down here.
That's a great point. That's a great point. When you keep throwing those numbers out there, Senator, I'm like, something is really wrong. Millions of people versus 400,000. And we got the same number of representatives. Something is really, really wrong. Tiana checked in and said, residents of DC are being taxed without representation, and they control the mayor's budget. So talk to us a little bit about that process. And Tiana, thank you for that comment.
They control the entire budget. So the mayor sends a budget to our legislative body, and in any other community in the United States, you have the executive and the legislative branch agree on a budget. That's the end of the process. Not here in DC. When DC passed a needle exchange bill, for example, to address the problem of HIV and bloodborne viruses in a public health setting, members of Congress from conservative rural communities defunded that program. And we were beginning to lose lives, and it had a terrible impact on our health. When the federal government decides that they want to spend more on let's say police, for example, and DC residents want to spend more on schools, the federal government can overrule the voters of DC, the local elected officials, and that's one of the problems that we have. So for DC residents, it's mostly about our self-determination. But on national priorities, particularly if you live in a city, you're being shortchanged by DC's lack of perspective and ability to influence legislation, particularly in the Senate. And remember, it's the Senate only, not the House, that confirms Supreme Court justice, that confirms federal appointees, cabinet officials, ambassadors. So there's a whole bunch of governing that takes place only in the Senate, where urban America as a whole is shortchanged.
Absolutely. Senator, we only got a few moments left. And again, sir, I truly appreciate your time and having this conversation with us. What happens next? I mean, this bill goes into the Senate. Most likely, will it pass? I mean, are there some folks within your own party that may serve as some barriers to this? What happens next, sir?
Well, one, we've gotten Democratic support higher than it's ever been. We had 46 co-sponsors in the last session. We're going to continue to get more. And of course, I'm going to shout out to my folks from Brooklyn, and we need them to call Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader, and make sure he makes this a priority. But the real battle is going to be out in the states and localities where regular American citizens need to call their voting members of Congress, because of course we don't have them in DC, and ask them to support this bill and sponsor this bill. But there is a bigger problem we have. We call that the filibuster, and that requires 60 votes to even vote on a bill. And so even once we get to the 51 vote threshold where we have enough votes to pass the legislation, we are still going to have to contend with the problems of the filibuster, which comes from some very unfortunate traditions in our history, to even get this bill for a vote. So we have a lot of work that we have to do, but part of that work is engaging with the community like I'm doing today, which is why the platform that you're giving me to talk about this important issue means so much to me and the people who I represent here in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we appreciate that. And I think the other part of this is because, D.C. has traditionally was known as Chocolate City. Things have certainly changed demographically, but there are still a lot of Black residents of D.C., residents who often feel marginalized. I have my close friends are from that area. And, it seems like you said, that it has been presented more as a federal Disneyland rather than a place where folks feel like they're being heard, being represented. So I think it's only right for us to have this conversation, especially for Black and marginalized communities in the district. So I appreciate you.
And African Americans continue to be the largest single demographic group. But when you add in the Latino population, the Asian population, it is a majority minority city. And I will tell you, even those folks who live here who happen to be white also come from groups that have tended to be marginalized as well. We have a large gay population, we have a large Jewish population, and so even the white community are not the kind of white folks that all of these white supremacists that are out there trying to keep us out consider their peers and equals. We are a diverse city. We represent every community, every language around the world you'll find spoken here. And we want our diversity to add to the diversity of the nation, but more importantly, have the diversity of political opinions represented, particularly in the U.S. Senate, where you don't really get that. It is a very unrepresented, undiverse body for a nation of so many people and ethnic groups who aren't getting a fair share.
Absolutely, Senator. The only promise I make, sir, is that you come back on to give us an update on the progress of this bill, because we would love to, have this conversation put out there on the forefront. So if you could do that, we would truly appreciate it, sir.
I sure will. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Senator Paul Strauss checking in, talking about D.C. statehood. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, we're going to check in with my brother Sinead Wakorfor as we get into some deeper conversation about the implication of Meta reinstating Trump accounts. Stay with us. That conversation is up next here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Faraji Muhammad. Before we jump into our next conversation, I got to let you know again, folks, that Black Star Network is taking digital media to the next level, especially independent, forward-thinking media, as we continue to push the issues and have the conversations that are important for you And that is why we are so excited to have the opportunity to be streaming live on Amazon, where if you have an access to an Amazon Fire Stick, you can finally check us out on Black Star TV. All you got to do is say, Alexa, play news from Black Star Network. And you will find us as we stream our program simultaneously as we're streaming on the Black Star Network, as we're streaming on other platforms like YouTube and Facebook. But Amazon, we are now streaming there live. So make sure you do your due diligence. Let your friends and family know, especially those who have Fire Stick TVs. And let's continue to have the conversation about the culture, the country, and so much more. So let people know Black Star Network is officially on Amazon News. All right, folks, I want to shift gears and have this conversation about former President Donald Trump, who got a little bit of a boost yesterday when it was announced by Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, that he will be allowed to be reinstated, have his accounts reinstated. Take a look at this, folks. Facebook and Instagram to end Trump's suspension from the platforms. His accounts, which Meta suspended after the January 6th riot, will be reinstated in the coming weeks with new guardrails in place to deter repeat offenders. And I want us to get a little further into this, and I want to share with you what Facebook was saying as to why they decided to put President Trump on air. And then also let's bring in my brother Shinedu Wakorfor, to give us his take on this, as he serves in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He's been doing social justice work for years and just an all-around just dope thinker. But let me share this first about what Facebook said about President Trump. Take a look at this, folks. This is coming from Facebook as it relates from NBC News. Take a look at this first quote. It says that Trump's accounts will be reinstated with these guardrails in place. Now, this is coming from Nick Clegg. And you heard Dr. Horn talking about Nick Clegg. Nick Clegg is Meta's president of global affairs. He said this in a statement. He said the guardrails will include heightened penalties for repeat offenses, penalties which will apply to other public figures whose accounts are reinstated from suspensions related to civil unrest under their updated protocol. He said, quote, in the event that Mr. Trump posts further violating content, the content will be removed and he will be suspended for between 1 month and 2 years, depending on the severity of the violation. He said, we're not trying to and this is what happens. Well, suppose Trump tries to post some crazy stuff again, some content that does violate these policies. He said, well, why are you allowing this to happen? Because he could possibly post again. Mr. Clegg responded by saying, quote, we're not trying to censor everything that everyone says in an open and free democracy. He said, we think that open and free debate on the rough and tumble of democratic debate should play out on Facebook and Instagram as much as anywhere else. Let's bring my brother Shinedu into the conversation about this. Shinedu, good afternoon, sir. How you doing, brother?
Peace, brother. I'm good. And yourself?
I'm good. Shinedu, so Mr. Clegg is saying, look, we're going to give this dude another chance. But at the same time, if he does this again, he'll be taken back off. He might serve a month off. He might serve a couple of years off again. But essentially, social media does not want to get in a place of censoring people. What's your take on all of this, bro?
This is kind of a very difficult topic because, bring him back, he says something off, and you let him back on for good behavior. I'm not sure what the ramifications are, but I think what's happening is when you see how much he was able to do and get away with it, folks post certain things that are not even violating of the rules, or use cultural words, that are not even violating rules, and they get blocked and banned. And I just think that, I don't know, I think that there's some level of favoritism. I understand the, First Amendment rights and all that. But here's the question that I have. If Osama bin Laden had a social media account, would he ever be able to get it back?
You said Osama bin Laden.
I said, if he had one, would he be able to give it back? Like, And I'm not
if he
saying
had like a Facebook post or Instagram post.
Yeah, if he had one, what would those rules be? And I say that because this is somebody who helped to incite a riot, a takeover of our nation. And I don't think a person like that should have access to social media the same way that we don't allow access back to certain international dictators, so on and so forth. So I'm kind of a bit confused on this measure. And in my opinion, you're giving it back to him. I don't think he's been asking for it. So that's another interesting thing.
I don't know, and Lisa, I don't know if you can, and I'm glad you brought that up, Lisa. I don't know if we can pull up the quote number 2 around what the former president had to say about this, and if not, let me know, because he did have a response. Of course, everyone knows that he's been operating from his social media space, Truth Social, which does not garner the same number of people that he would have gotten, say, on Twitter, on Facebook. Now, we also know, folks, just to notice that this only comes from Facebook and Instagram, Meta. This does not come from, he's not on Twitter yet. He hasn't been fully reinstated on Twitter yet. But this only comes from Facebook and Meta. But this is what former President Donald Trump said as he got word that his accounts have been reinstated. And take a listen to this. He said, Facebook, which has lost billions of dollars in value since deplatforming your favorite president, me. This is wow. Has just announced that they are reinstating my account. Such a thing should never again happen to a sitting president or anybody else who is not deserving of retribution. Such a thing. First thing, yo. Trump. He's like the gift that keeps on giving.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we heard Dr. Gerald Horne, one of our great scholars. He talked about the fact that Facebook and social media companies have lost a lot of money, as he says, buckets of money. So they have taken a hit as a result of this suspension. But it's not just because of Trump's suspension, it's because of a lot of other things. So for Trump to say that, he understands that. And this is what Trump does. Trump will throw in a little bit of truth with a whole bunch of lies. And people will get so confused as to what's the truth and what's the lie, not being able to distinguish it because they don't have a reference point of what the truth is initially. So Trump put this out there, of course, calling himself your favorite president, and then calling himself your sitting president. Bro, you are out of office. You're not a sitting president. Technically, you were in the role, but that's the term you use for people who are actually still in the role. So that's what Trump said in response to this. So my thing is this. Here's my thing. And Sinead, there have been some conversation about this. If they allow Trump back on, should they have allowed other folks back on that are often deemed, quote unquote, controversial? Whether you're talking about black leaders, I've heard in the past, people say, oh, what about Minister Farrakhan? What about this person? What about that person? And do you think that this will open the door for that? And here's the other thing. That's one. The second part of that question is, since we are in this space right now, in this country, where these voices have a space, and I'm really, this is the crazy part. I know some people might disagree with me, but one of the greatest freedoms that we do have in this country is the freedom of speech. So I think that, to Facebook's credit, that you can't censor people, but you can protect the speech in such a way that it doesn't become a weapon that it can't be weaponized to hurt other people. You see, does that make sense what I'm saying, Sinead?
Absolutely.
Because what we say on this platform, some people would say y'all need to be censored. And so we can't, if we're into that space, right? Some people might listen to Brother Roland and be like, oh, he's too controversial. He needs to be censored, right? if you start throwing that around, then we got to first start with ourselves in that space. But what's your take on that, bro?
And I'm glad you brought up Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, because that's what I was thinking about. The question then becomes, what is the standard? They removed the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan off of Instagram. I think this was back maybe 2016, maybe 17. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting, or what remains interesting, that now that you're putting Trump, somebody who just basically been off for 2 years, if that.
2 years.
What's interesting is, where was that room for reentry for folks like Minister Farrakhan and so on and so forth? Also, what is the standard of harm, or what is the standard of what you can say with consequences? Because we have to also remember, although Meta, is an American company, you also have folks in other nations who follow the rules of speech and freedom differently. And I think what happens is there is this over-homogenization of idealisms, where now a Trump is allowed back on, but then other folks are not allowed back on with that same warning. They took Minister Farrakhan off, for instance, without warning. And now you're bringing Trump back on without actually him asking. But then more importantly, you're giving him another chance. And that goes back to, when you think about equity, that double standard that you see between two people. The facts has shown that the Nation of Islam, they haven't incited a riot. Actually, when the Nation of Islam meets up with people, it's a very beautiful moment of peace. I would know that because I was at some of those large gatherings, like 10-10-15 for the Million Man March. And that is proof on record of safe assembly. But this man who just created chaos, where a group of people try to overthrow the greatest country, strongest country in the history of the world, and now he's being allowed back on. It just shows an uneven balance of power. And if you're Black, it just explains what we already know. White folks will always get passes. It's a white company, and it's a white man. Their ideologies will always align, even when they do put some type of swift justice. But it's just a moment for us to kind of think, to the point of this network, why it's very important for folks to build the things that represent their needs.
Folks, we got, and I'm glad that you made that point. We're going to continue to delve deeper into this, folks. We got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, more conversation with Brother Shinadu around this news coming from Meta, saying that they're going to reinstate President Trump's, former President Trump's accounts. What does that mean for the larger conversation of free speech? What does that mean for the 2024 presidential campaign? And of course, so much more. We want you to join us in the conversation. Post your comments in our chat as we're streaming live on YouTube and Facebook, and of course, Black Star Network. And stay with us. We got a lot to get to here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about Blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is roland@rolandsmartin.com. Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
Folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. We've been talking to Culture crew member Sinead Wakofor to talk to us about his, to get his understanding and to provide his analysis around this latest announcement coming from Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, that they said that they will reinstate President Trump's accounts in a few weeks. Now, many folks may have forgotten about the former president, and more importantly, many folks may not have want to remember about the former president. But the fact is, the former president is coming back into social media space, and we wanted to know, well, how does this affect everything from the ideal, the conversation around free speech, the 2024 presidential election, and so much more. In a moment, we're going to get to our online culture crew to hear what you got to say. So make sure y'all post your comments, and we'll get right to you in a few moments. But Sinead, when we talk about, I mean, you ended your last comments before the break saying this is why that we need to look at alternative spaces. I mean, are you one to say that to look at the state of social media right now, to say, you know what, this is not for Black folks in this country. This is not for us, and that we should walk away. Do you agree with that? Or do you feel like we should still fight to have those spaces where we're protecting the voices of like Black Twitter? I haven't heard of a Black Facebook. And so if anybody have ever heard of that being a part of that community, I feel like more Black folks are probably on Twitter and Instagram than we used to be on Facebook. I feel like we used to be on Facebook, but that's a different thing. So if there's a Black Facebook, like there's a Black Twitter, y'all let me know. But what's your take on that, bro?
I mean, we've been fighting for that space that you're just to be a part, even in regular world, compared to social media. And how well has that gone? I just think, look, I think it's good to have a centralized place for everybody until you realize that everybody isn't treated as equal as everybody else. Sometimes social media becomes another place, for racism and all of those things that we see in real life to kind of present itself. And because social media is such an open playground for anybody and everybody to create as they please, I think it is important for us to create things under our culture that make sense to us. I enjoy Black Twitter, but again, Black Twitter is just a room in a house that we don't own. So it's imperative that rather than just taking up a small room, that we can be the house, we can be the conduit, and kind of police our own, if you will, and kind of move in our nature. And with all the promotion of historically Black colleges, we have so many Black promoters and engineers. I think we might need a little bit more of the seed funders to come in handy to promote us like they did, like other seed funders did for Meta and Instagram and so on and so forth. But I think it is about time, because what's happening is a couple of things. One, our culture is kind of being washed away, if you will. And every time we want to express in the way that is appropriate for our culture and our beliefs, it's like we're breaking some carnal law. And then we see something like this, where, swift hand of justice, it's not quite so swift, or it's quite so forgiving.
Right. But see, there's the other side of it too, right, Sinead, where people say, okay, if Black folks if we move forward to an alternative space, right, then how do we make sure that the remnants and the ills of injustice will truly be seen and heard by the masses of people? And the reason I'm bringing that up is because, like what we're seeing down with the Bethune-Cookman, right? We got students protesting, students who want to be heard, but social media is a huge part of that. Social media plays a huge part of that. You've worked in the college community. Young people use social media as their voice. They're not able to get on the news, right? They may not be able to give that interview in the local newspaper. But one place that they can control the narrative is on social media. And social media, as much as people like to believe that it's just this group of people that are, quote unquote, their friends or their followers, it really goes out to everyone. It really goes out to everyone. So, I think that there is still a benefit to that, because if you're trying to highlight some level of injustice, then you want to put it out on the largest platform as possible, like we're seeing our student leaders down in Bethune-Cookman. But so do you agree with me or disagree with me on that, bro?
I agree with you, but two things can exist. There's something called JDate. It's I think it's a Jewish dating app or site, and then there's also Hinge and Bumble. Just because there's something of specificity doesn't mean that people can't intertwine between the two. And I bring that example is just like what Black people have been saying from the beginning of time. Creating our own doesn't mean evading the other. And I just think it's important because if you even look at what Black Twitter is, or I don't know what they call it, but the LGBTQs have their own thing that's involved in Twitter. It's still existing in the zeitgeist of the space, but it's that own special place that you can feel, heard and understood. I just think it's important when we talk about our voice being heard to make sure that we are collecting it correctly, and with people who understand, and more or less, like, yes, we want to get our message out to the grand world. But you know what I know that we don't want to do? Keep explaining ourselves. Sometimes you just might want to get on social media and say something to another person who generically understands what you're saying without having to go back and forth and give context to your existence.
And I think but you know what though, Sinead? Let's keep it 100, bro. People like going back and forth on social media.
Everybody like mess makes money.
Everybody wants to put out a thought where everybody can comment on. You try to, I'm sure, and I go through it, folks. So don't think I'm immune to this, folks. I know how many of us truly like bang our heads against the wall because you want to say something that's going to spark some conversation, and then say if you only get 10, you might get 2 or 3 comments on your post. You be like, man, I'm taking this down. I'm taking this down because why? You want to have the conversation. You want people to tune in to what you're saying. And that's part of being on social media. That part of being heard, being influential, shaping the context of the discussion. I get it wholeheartedly. Conscious thought, let me hear from you. You said, just like if we vote our numbers, we win. If we coalesce around our common causes, our issues would be addressed and resolved, right? I feel you, bro. I feel you. So I think that's the thing. Like, I'm getting out of the space, and maybe this is just my self-care mode kicking in right now, Sinead. But what folks do, and I'm not talking about just white people, I'm talking about Black folks, Latino, I don't care who you are. As Jay-Z said, what you eat don't make me.
They don't.
You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make me. That's what you eat, brother. That's what you eat, sis. Because if I get upset every time, and Sinead, I get tired of getting upset. So if I get upset every time you make a move or every time you decide on something, man, I'm going to always be angry. And I can't stay always angry because life is too short for all that. Life is too short. If Trump says something crazy, so since we know Trump is going to come back on social media, you're going to have some wild folks. You're going to have, but guess what? Guess what? They just respond. I remember seeing a post, right, from my sister, Dr. K. Big shout out to Dr. K in Baltimore at WEAA. And one of the things she said that she said, folks, are we still she asked this question. She said, are we still taking on the stance that when they go low, we go high, based off what First Lady Michelle Obama said, right? Everybody, you know. And it's like, I thought about that one time yesterday, Sinead, and I thought to myself, no, we're not always taking that stance. Mm-mm. We can't always take when they go low, we go. And we got to, so many people throw that out there, but she said that in a certain, I'm talking about First Lady, she said that in a certain context. Mm-hmm. She didn't say that should always be your stance.
Yeah, I think she meant
every single thing. When they go low, we go high. No, sometimes when they go low, you get in the mud, bro. You start punching back.
I think she meant to add the qualifier, when they go low, we should go high. Because sometimes you have to go low to get high. That's all I'm saying.
Or sometimes you got to go low to get in the dude's ass. So you can take them higher.
I mean, sometimes.
Real quick, let's go back to our online culture crew. Ming Lee checked in. You said Trump is already coming back to Facebook in a couple of weeks. They said it on the news. Yup, they absolutely did. Thank you, Ming Lee. Good to hear from you. Vic, you checked in and said fan base, where you can get paid off your content and not be throttled. Now, that's the other thing, right? Because we talk about fan base. Brother Roland talks about it, and we understand the beauty and the value of it. But is social media just for selling your product or services, right? And I get that. But there are a lot of other places you can do that. There's a lot of other places. You know what the funny thing is, and I might be wrong on this, Sinead, and you probably know people that do that. When I talk to people who are actually, say, in sales, I talk to realtors, I talk to people who do business. They say that as much as they post about their services, their products, and all of that, they're still number one source of getting new clients, getting new customers is word of mouth. It's not even social media.
It never, word of mouth has been the game since Jesus Christ and Friends, okay? And we learned the same thing in comm, because the truth of the matter is social media will let you see something accessibly 24 hours, and this is interesting, but nothing is convincing you more than hearing a human being giving interaction in your face, somebody you know, somebody you trust, somebody you don't know. You heard this person talk about it. Oh, I want to be where they are.
Right.
It never fails.
Right. So social media has its place, sure, and we just have to keep our eyes on. We really just have to be much more intentional about how we use it. It's a tool, folks. It's a platform. So let's not lose ourselves over it. But President Trump coming back onto it.
Wow.
But again, I stand with Facebook and saying we should not get in the space of censoring people, because once we start to do that, think about Black voices. Once you start to censor, if you say, oh, we need the president, then check out. That must mean that one of us can be censored.
Check this out. What they should do is what they were doing. When you say something, you put something there at the bottom that verifies, even if it's of a belief that a large group of folks don't agree with. You put, Instagram does it now, Twitter does it, and Meta does it. Just keep that going, and maybe because the issue right now is that truth is becoming people's reality. Lies are becoming the truth and becoming people's reality. So we need to be able to say, okay, here's what it is, and here's the verification, because the verification is what matters more than what the person is saying. For instance, I don't know if you recently saw, there's a fake account or a stan account, whatever you want to call it, that posted Aretha Franklin's song Natural Woman is being now ridiculed by trans activists, and it caused a whole hoopla. Turns out it was a fake. It wasn't real. But that's the point I'm making. We're getting to a dangerous point where it could be used to rile up people over something that's not even true. And that's why verification and here's the fact of this or here's the fact of that is very important. Now, the question is, who actually believes a fact is a fact and not an opinion? That's where we're going to have some trouble.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great point. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, I'm going to pick Brother Shanaydu's brain, especially as he works in human resources and workplace issues. And let's change the game here. Let's talk about who is engaged and not engaged at work. I bet you already know which group is more engaged than others. We'll have that conversation and why it's important for us to even discuss. So stay with us. That discussion is coming up next here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punching! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? Pull up a chair. Take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
We're all impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. In the final few minutes, I wanted to talk to my brother about workplace issues. And folks, I came across some information about the next generation, about generation, what do they call it? Let me bring Shanaydu back into the frame. Shanaydu, you got Generation Z, you got millennials, and you got baby boomers, right? And those are the three. Are they all? Wait, is Generation Z and millennials, are they the same generation?
No, millennials is Generation X.
All right, Generation X. That's right. I think I'm a part of the Generation Z. Anyway, folks, let's bring you back into the frame here. There has been a new report, a new study that was just put out, folks, about workplace engagement, and a new report from Gallup finds that large number of workers, especially Generation Zers and young millennials, are not engaged with their job, and that could make their climb up the career ladder harder, as well as hurt companies' overall performance, folks. And I want to get Shanaydu's take on this, because Shanaydu, you worked in human resources, brother. you understand the dynamics of workplace issues. The Gallup surveys of roughly 67,000 people in 2022 found only 32% of workers are engaged with their work compared with 36% in 2020. The share of workers found to be actively disengaged has risen since 2020, and younger workers have seen a bigger drop in engagement than older ones. Those under 35 reported feeling less heard and less cared about at work. Fewer Generation Zers and young millennials reported having someone at work who encourages their development and fewer opportunities to learn and grow. Shanadu, is this surprising, and why are we seeing this lack of engagement from young people?
No, it's very accurate, and I'm going to go forward. If you think about the generations that came before some of these young folks, their mindset was about being dedicated to the work is matters most, because they wanted the benefits, the retirement, the this, the that. And I think a lot of that made a lot of those parents unattentive or inattentive to their children. And now you have children, whether that be the Generation X, Y, or Z, whatever, who are now of that other generation, as in the offspring of that generation. And now their needs are different. They don't care about all of these benefits. It doesn't matter to them most. What matters to them is that they're heard, that they're respected, that their mental health is considered, that optimization of work matters. So if you put the two together, it's on point. It seems like a lot of younger folks, just in my thoughts, I'm not a researcher, but a lot of younger folks are trying to get a lot of confirmations that usually you would expect them to get at home. And it's like they want to be heard. So if they don't feel like they're being heard, what happens is people get bored and it's like, well, I'm just here to get the paycheck.
Right.
And I don't think that means they don't care more about the work, but they realize that, no, we're not a family. This is work. Their investment is self. And I think that's very, very important, because this is why we have these quiet quitting and people moving, because people are actually now, workers are now putting themselves before company, which I think is important for a balance, when it used to just be, company first, company first, company first. And I think industries have to change with the type of people that they're serving. You need kind of that Google aspect where you have different furniture, different setups, you have different activities, recreational, even the idea of having employee resource groups or things of that nature. They can be helpful to bring up camaraderie for work. Because I think what matters more, if you want to get people more interested in work, you actually should get the employees more interested in one another. What do we have in common? Because when you find that commonality, they can now bring that commonality to brainstorm ideas for work.
That's an interesting point. And they're using the metric of 2020, which we all know is the time that the pandemic kicked in. And I think that also has played on young people's minds that it's interesting. We made the pandemic, and I'm talking about the narrative around COVID, was that this was a life-threatening situation, which it was. And unfortunately, we have lost a lot of people to COVID, a lot of loved ones. But so much so that it compelled all of us, I think, to reevaluate what is important in life, right? How much time do we want to spend on thinking about work versus how much time we want to spend on thinking about ourselves and our families and what's really important to us? Then the switch became back to, okay, COVID is we're going to quote unquote live with COVID, but y'all need to get back into thinking about work again. Like, work is more important, productivity. And it's hard, I think, for a lot of people, especially 35-year-olds or for even 40-year-olds. People are like, wait a minute. You can't just switch us on and off like that mentally, expecting us to jump back into the office, jump back into wanting to, to worry about money all the time, to be quote unquote chasing the bag. Y'all remember hearing people from COVID during 2020 and 2021 talking about chasing the bag? What bag are you chasing, bro? Like, why we're spending so much time chasing the bag, so much time at work that we forgot to live. We forgot to take time for ourselves. So after COVID, now everybody's talking about self-care, self-healing, you know what I mean? Taking time for yourself. So, it's just a lot of mixed messages. And I especially think that for the next generation, or for those who are in that 35-year-old and under age group, I think that a lot of them are probably like, no, this is more important. This is definitely more important than chasing the bag. What do you hear that from employees when you have been in those in human resource meeting? Do you hear these things coming up?
Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of companies are doing a couple of other things. This generation really cares about self-care, and we're trying to enjoy our time now rather than later. And a lot of companies are starting to realize that if they don't kind of pivot to what the market is doing, that they'll miss out on the best type of workers. And I think one great thing is unlimited PTO. And people see that when you hear the word unlimited, people see that as like, oh my God, it's crazy, it's forever. But studies have shown that unlimited PTO, that when you put that in the space, people actually end up using unlimited PTO less than they use a 2 weeks or 3 weeks vacation when you do it in that way. And also it becomes cheaper when you do unlimited PTO, because now you don't have to pay people out X amount of weeks when they leave. But also what it does is it shows that the company believes that you and your time is valuable, your rest is valuable, and that you can do what you need to do and come back. And even with remote work, I think one major thing that everybody's starting to realize is that how much more billions did companies make during a pandemic when we all were at home? Now folks realize that, no, you don't have to be in the office, and no, people will not return. And you better keep that remote option on your thing, or you're going to miss the new age talented worker. And it's not about laziness. It's about, we have to address why people were even working as hard as they were working in the first place. No one thinks about it. You're just told that that's how work is. But it's not supposed to be that way.
Right.
The average 9-to-5 job is built off of a system that was created in the early 1900s with Ford when he created the assembly line. That's where the 9-to-5 workday came from. So between him and JP Morgan as well, it was JP Morgan who pushed that 9-to-5 workday. But the idea is, as we industrialize ourselves and we go into this new revolution of, I think we're kind of in the time of innovation and mental health. What work looks like has to change.
Absolutely.
If I can visit my doctor virtually, something I could never do before, and do a whole appointment virtually, I need to be able to have those type of options for work. And it should not be predicated under laziness. It should be predicated under innovation, because in the same breath, folks who like to say that this generation is lazy and remember, most folks who created the major companies that are big players now were this age when they created them. Look at Bill Gates, look at Jeff Bezos, look at Elon Musk. These are some of the top 3 companies in this country. So I think we have to put a bigger emphasis on innovation, whatever that means, and pay attention to because the employee will tell you what the market is coming to be.
Absolutely.
And are we forgetting about attention span? It's going down every year. So you have to factor those things in.
That's a whole nother conversation right there, Sinead. That is a whole different conversation, because if we have short attention span, man, life is going to be hard, brother. If we have short attention span and no patience, life is going to be hard for you. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know what? The one thing that I think we can at least gain from this part of the discussion is that we do need to have, we should reevaluate our relationship, our personal relationship and work, set boundaries. I'm very clear that, what I do professionally and how I spend my time personally, there are distinctions. There is a boundary. I don't like to bring, quote unquote, my work home all the time. I don't want to spend my weekends just, trying to figure out how to get stuff done. I mean, I've been in those jobs and been in those spaces, and I don't enjoy it. As I get older, Sinead, I don't want to spend my time like that. Money come and go, right? Jobs come and go. But time, can't get that back. Because once time comes, it don't go back to what you used to. You kids can't get that back at all. So that is something for us to consider. Sinedu, I truly appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much for being on the show, as always, providing some analysis and intellect as part of the conversation. And God willing, man, we'll reconnect with you sometime next week, bro.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us. I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to thank my dynamic team. My sister Lise is on the 1-2s. Lise, thank you so much. Joel, thank you. And my wonderful control room. And of course, I got to thank my online culture crew. All of you who got something to say, thank you so much for having the conversations in the chat rooms, continuing the conversations, and so much more. Make sure y'all do your due diligence. Go to blackstarnetwork.com and make sure that you download the app for free. Let people know that Black independent media is here, and we're here to stay. Plus, if you haven't had an opportunity, please support us financially at blackstarnetwork.com and do your part to sustain this media space, this media platform. Also, as I mentioned to you earlier today, if you do have an Amazon TV, or you know folks that do have an Amazon Fire Stick TV, make sure that you let them know that we're streaming live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on Amazon Fire Stick, and just say, Alexa, play news from Black Star Network. Alexa, play the culture. And trust and believe, my face will pop up. My face will pop up. All right, make sure you do that. Also, follow us on all social media platforms at Black Star Network on IG and on Twitter. And again, please give to help continue to build this platform. This is something very new. This is something revolutionary, folks. And we are making moves in all types of progress. And we want you to be the center, the very source of this movement. So your support means everything to us. Also, make sure you follow me on my social media at The Real Faraji on Instagram and Faraji on Twitter. I would love to continue to build with you. And to all of my online culture crew that are already connected to me, thank you for all of your the various pieces of content that y'all send to me. Truly appreciate it. And I will try to weigh in as much as I can on these conversations. All right, stay tuned. Up next is RMU, Roland Martin Unfiltered. And as always, folks, never be afraid to challenge what's wrong. Stand for what's right while being yourself in the process. Tomorrow, we will have a best of show tomorrow. So we hope that you tune in, because some conversations you may have missed over these past couple of weeks, and you may be able to tune in. So tomorrow we will have a best of show tomorrow, and then we'll be back on the live show next week. But God willing, we will reconnect then. And I hope and pray that you have a safe weekend. Enjoy your time with your family. Enjoy the nature. If you're having some sunshine this weekend, and we will reconnect next week for another exciting edition of The Culture right here on the Black Star Network. Peace.